I wrote a book called Explanations and Corrections in the Gospel of Luke. One of the chapters was about the times of the Gentiles that Luke wrote about in Luke 21. And I claimed that Luke was thinking of the time and times and half a time in Daniel 7, but that he didn't want to confuse Theophilus or whoever he wrote for with that uh, figure of speech. The reason being that he knew it was figurative and an idiomatic expression just signifying uh, the times that were allotted to the Gentiles. So this is the second part of my discussion of that chapter. In the first part, I discussed metonymy, like the basis by which I could say that the fourth beast of Daniel 7 would was the abomination of desolation, and that I could also say, well, that the time and times and half a time were under its jurisdiction when the Daniel 7 actually says that the holy ones were handed over to the horn of the wild beast, meaning a king. So I'll start reading from this chapter. The author of the book of Revelation seems to have started the interpretation that the word kairos means year in Daniel 7:25. The definition of year for kairos does not appear in some Greek lexicons, but it does in some. Edward Robinson in Parkhurst said that kairos equals year in a prophetic use of the word. These people are referred to wrote books from long ago, books that are public domain, since so I won't have to worry about getting permission to quote from them. All the lexicons that I have seen which give this definition cite the book of Revelation. This is from Samuel C. Loveland's lexicon. Kairos u ho. Time, season, opportunity. A year. Revelation 12:14. Notice that he cites Revelation 12:14 for as justification for giving the definition a year. As the lexicon says, the author of Revelation does indeed mean that a kairos is a year, because verse 6 calls the time and times and half a time of verse 14 1,203 score days, which number of days is 3.5 years. If the book of Revelation did not exist, Loveland and other lexicographers would not have entered a definition for a prophetical year in their lexicons. And I'll interject that if you look up, do a search on YouTube for a time and times and half a time, you'll find lots of Christian exegetes or commentators who will use prophecies and convert 3.5 years or 7 years into the 1,260 days or 2,520 days and say it actually means years, etc. And that they would not do that except for the book of Revelation. I claim in this book that Luke corrected mistakes in some books of the Christian scriptures. Unlike commentators who reconcile irreconcilable Bible passages, I'm suggesting here that Revelation 12 is wrong, containing an interpretation that was corrected by Luke. And I'll interject here that that's what I think. And I repeatedly say things that I think are mistaken about Revelation. However, John Calvin and some later Calvinists had an interpretation similar to mine, that a time and half a time have a general sense of a certain time or a time known only to God, and yet they thought the author of Revelation understood that. When the book of Daniel was written, I assumed that everybody understood that the phrase under discussion was figurative. In the first century, Jesus and Luke understood that, but the author of Revelation didn't. The fact that Daniel speaks of a time and times and half a time in Daniel 7:25 and also of 7 times and Daniel chapter 4 facilitated the wrong interpretation that a time equals a year, because years can be counted. The fact that the times are counted is not proof that times are years, because times are counted in Daniel 6, 10, and 13, where Daniel kneels down 3 times, kairos trace, a day, not 3 years a day. Likewise, the 7 times heptakairoi of Daniel 4 could conceivably mean 7 occasions when Nebuchadnezzar lost his sanity. John Calvin thought that the number 7 here was figurative. Daniel may have intended the word time to have one of the other definitions of kairos found in the lexicons. Few, if any, English translations render Daniel 2:21 with the word years. Since I'm discussing the Greek word kairos, I will cite the Greek Old Testament. In his 1844 translation of the Septuagint, Brenton translates Daniel 2:21, and he changes times and seasons. He appoints kings and removes them, giving wisdom to the wise, and prudence to them that have understanding. Charles Thomson translates the passage similarly. He changeth times and seasons. Thomson and Brenton translate kairos kai chronos in Daniel 2:21, times and seasons, not years and seasons. Brenton translated the expression heos kairu kai kairu in Daniel 7:12 for certain times, adding in a marginal note literally time and time. Charles Thomson translated the phrase literally until a time and a time. Neither added the times together and translated until 2 times. But what if Revelation 12 is correct? After all, the first verse of that book says that the revelation of Jesus Christ was given by God to Jesus to show his servants. God is the greatest possible authority. Luke wrote his gospel by laboriously studying previous gospels and testimonies. It would have been so much better if God or Jesus had sent an angel to tell him what to write. That way Luke wouldn't have had to work so hard, and his gospel would have been infallible. But there are several reasons for doubting the interpretations of Revelation. That book was doubted by or unknown to many ancient Christians. The book makes confused allusions to the Hebrew scriptures, some of which I will mention elsewhere. Revelation overrules the previous counsel given by Jesus and Luke to not interpret the meaning of the time periods in Daniel. The time periods in Daniel were given by angels, but Jesus said in Mark 13:32, American Standard Version, "But of that day or that hour knoweth no one, not even the angels in heaven, neither the Son, but the Father." The apostles knew that Jesus was making references to Daniel. Jesus' counsel hadn't changed after his resurrection. And I will interject here that at Mark 13 is the eschatological discourse, or the Olivet discourse, and Jesus made allusions to Daniel in that discourse, and that's why I said that his comment about not even the angels in heaven knowing is a reference to the angels in Daniel. Okay, so this important scripture in Acts 1:7 says, "And he said unto them, It is not for you to know times, kairos, or seasons, which the Father hath set within his own authority." The phrase times or seasons would have reminded the disciples of Daniel 2:21 and 7:12. I understand this passage to mean, don't try to calculate time periods from the book of Daniel. And again, Jesus said this after his resurrection. Some of the last words he ever spoke, in my opinion, meant don't calculate the time periods. And in my opinion, it was a reference to Daniel 2:21. When Luke wrote times of the Gentiles in Luke 21:24, instead of time and times and half a time, as written in Daniel 7:25, I think he intended for the reader to understand the time that God allows the Gentiles to rule over God's people. And he was referring to the time periods of desolation mentioned in Daniel 9:26 and 27. Luke didn't quote a time and times and half a time because he understood it as a figurative expression, meaning an indefinite period of time, a certain time period. Luke didn't want to confuse Theophilus with a Hebrew figure of speech, possibly already archaic or obsolete, which was liable to be misunderstood. Brenton, quoted above, resisting the temptation to translate kairos as year, and also resisting the temptation to add them, translated the expression Haos kairu in Daniel 7:12 for certain times. If he could translate a time and a time as certain times, couldn't he have translated a time and times as certain times? And couldn't he have also translated a time and times and half a time as certain times? In the special definitions sometimes given in lexicons for kairos in the book of Revelation, namely that kairos equals years, now is that special meaning a possible meaning in Luke's books? Luke never used kairos to mean year in his gospel or Acts. Here's how Luke used the word kairos in his gospel. And I might skip some of this to save time. Luke 1:20, thou believe it's not my words, which shall be fulfilled in their season, or kairon. Luke 4:13, he departed from him for a season, kairu. Luke 8:13, in time, kairo of temptation. So I'm going to skip that down to Acts. Here's how Luke used the word kairos in Acts. Acts 3:19, seasons or kairoi of refreshing. Acts 7:20, in which season in Hokairo Moses was born. Acts 12:1, know about that time, or kairon. So I'll skip this to save time. And I'm going to skip some of these commentators because I'm trying to keep my videos less than 15 minutes, but I'll try to copy and paste some of this in the comment section of the video so anybody interested can read it. You know, these Calvin and the Calvinists are interesting because they also insisted that the 42 months or the time and time and half of time always have a figurative meaning. But I don't know how they supported other things in Revelation that I found fault with. So besides this quotation from John Calvin, the Geneva Bible, it was translated, as I remember, by Calvinists, and it has similar figurative interpretations of the expression under discussion in its marginal notes. And I'm going to skip that to save time. So I said above that the author of Revelation thought that the times of Daniel were years. The annotations in the 1560 Geneva Bible did not agree. They assumed that the author of Revelation knew the figurative meaning of the expression. That Bible has this marginal note on the 42 months of Revelation 11:2, meaning a certain time, for God hath limited the times of Antichrist's tyranny. And so I better skip some more of these quotations to keep under my time limit. The quotation above shows that the word time used in Daniel in itself does not mean year, but commentators think that the meaning is shown to be a year in Daniel 7 from other Bible verses. For example, Barnes thought that the 7 times in Daniel 4 was 7 years, but maybe the 7 times meant 7 occasions. In Lecture 19th of Volume 1 of Meyer's translation of John Calvin's commentaries on Daniel, Calvin says, I have said nothing of those times, but their opinion is probable who take it for an indefinite number, meaning until a long time shall pass away. And I'll skip down here to the bullet points here. Luke's phrase was indefinite, like the Latin ad tempus mentioned by Barnes. Luke did not figure that a time and times and half a time was 3.5 years, because Jesus said in Mark 13:32 that the angels didn't know the day and hour, which I think was a reference to the angels in Daniel 12. And because Daniel could have easily written 3.5 times or 3.5 years, but instead he wrote the words in the phrase in an unnatural order, neither ascending nor descending, which signified that the phrase was figurative and not to be added. And because Jesus, referring to the kairos in Daniel, told the apostles just before his ascension, it is not for you to know times or the seasons which the Father hath set in his own authority. Because Luke knew that the expression under discussion was unsolvable without divine help, like the handwriting on the wall in Daniel 5. So there will be another episode on this same chapter.